There is no evidence whatsoever that excess protein is good for you. Enough proteins, but not excess protein. It's scary. The breast cancer, the colorectal cancer occurring earliest. Advertisement, and even podcasters talking about very high protein diet. It could get a lot of people into early mortality, early disease.
Time magazine named Valter Longo as one of the 50 most influential people in healthcare. He invented the Fasting Mimicking Diet, which has spread around the world to everyday people and to healthcare professionals. Dozens of recent papers have been published in leading journals showing how effective it can be for cancer and diabetes remission.
20 years ago, we started thinking about how can we keep all the benefits of calorie restriction and remove all the problems. And that's where the fasting mimicking diet came around. So
you have something that is a diet that mimics fasting, kind of tricks our body into thinking we're fasting, and it does some remarkable things. Talk about that.
I wanted someone who could ask him great questions, so I asked Stanford professor Tamiko Katsumoto to help me interview him.
I've been a huge fan of Valter Longo's for a long time, and when approached with the opportunity to do an interview with him, I of course jumped at it. And I jumped on a plane from Stanford down to USC to do the interview.
Who wants to be the one that changes the FDA?
We should talk offline.
Aging is by far the most powerful enemy when it comes to mortality, when it comes to diseases. I challenge you to come up with something that will change more gene expression in the body than fasting. Nobody's ever even come up with something theoretically that could do that. Meaning, if you fast a person for, let's say, 5 days, it'd be hard to find something else that causes more changes in the body than those 5 days.
He makes some bold claims, and we were looking for weaknesses.
Are you familiar with that paper?
You're getting interrogated here.
We didn't find holes in his science, but I found his weakness.
You've been thinking about that chocolate.
Oh, so you're like, with 100% chocolate, you're like I am with FMDs.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't handle it. You can't
Exactly.
You can't handle 100%.
There is now additional benefits of the 100% compared to the 85%. My mission list has always been, how do you make people live to 110 healthy, right? And so we started with genetics, and it was important, many years ago, to to understand the mechanisms, right? So what genes are controlling aging, are preventing cancer, preventing DNA damage. And 20 years ago, we started thinking about how can we keep all the benefits of calorie restriction and remove all the problems. And that's where the fasting mimicking diet came around. So can you fast people, mice first and rats, and then people for a few days? And would these effects last a long time? And will we get the same benefits as permanent calorie restriction, but avoid the problems? Most of the recommendations on diet are one pillar, sometimes half a pillar. They say epidemiological data, right? Which is great. It's one of the pillars. But then we say you combine epidemiology with basic research. How do you make a mouse live longer? Then you combine it with clinical trials. Then you go look around the world, Okinawa, Loma Linda, southern Italy. How do the centenarians make it to that age? Or the mutants like we follow in Ecuador that have mutations in certain genes. What are the genes and why do they live longer?
There are an estimated 250 Lerone dwarfs worldwide. 1/3 of them live in the Loja province of southern Ecuador. The Lerone dwarfs share a rare genetic disorder that prevents the use of the normal growth hormone produced in the body. Dr. Guevara believes the defective gene that stunts their growth also prevents cancer and diabetes.
Yeah, so you put it all together and then you connect it with nutrients at the molecular level, and then I think that's where the longevity diet comes from.
I love all of the mechanistic stuff you figured out. You mentioned certain amino acids and certain other pathways in the sugar. What can you tell us what some of those key pathways are?
The major one coming out of the genetic studies has been growth hormone receptor, and then growth hormone receptor feeding into three things: insulin, IGF-1, and TOR. Some of the drugs, for example, that extend the lifespan of, rapamycin is one of the most successful drugs to extend the lifespan of a mouse.
Right.
But also acarbose, which is interfering with the sugar pathway. That's also one of the most successful ones, right? That network, sugar, amino acid, growth hormone receptor, IGF-1, insulin, and TOR.
Right.
That seems to be fairly solid, right? And after 30 years of work, I think not too many people say, no, that's not at the center. Now there are different genes that have moved in, but they seem to all converge into that. I always show this slide where I show some of the organisms that have record longevity extension, and they're dwarf, right? The yeast that lives the longest is very small. The fly, they have a longest lifespan extension, are very small, and the mice, they have the record lifespan extension.
And the people.
Now the people, certainly it's a little bit trickier. We follow these little people of Ecuador that have the same mutation as the mice that have record longevity. You have to go back in history. It's not so easy to figure out. You have to see when did their brothers and sisters die, right? And their brothers and sisters were heterozygotes. Right. So it's a very It's very difficult to determine, are they 10% longer live, 15, 20? We don't know, right? So we haven't determined yet for people, but they seem to be living longer. So they're certainly much more protected against diseases than people that don't have the mutations. But longevity-wise, it's not as easy to, we haven't demonstrated that yet.
So I guess what I was thinking about then is with the growth hormone receptor mutants, it's the resistance to cancer, I think was one of the phenotypes, is that right?
They rarely develop cancer. Yeah. And now the good news is the mice that had the same mutation, they have about 40%, 50% decrease in lifelong cancer incidence.
Oh, wow.
That's been very important to us to say, the human data could be a coincidence, but it'd be a little strange coincidence considering all the model system and the mice that happen to live a lot longer and have health for the cancers, right? Same thing for diabetes. They're very much protected. People that have the growth hormone receptor mutation very much protected from diabetes. And the mice, John Kopchick's work at Ohio University showing that they are very much protected against diabetes models. Cognitive decline, we brought them actually here across the street, and we did functional MRIs. Just like the mice, they have a more youthful cognitive phenotype. So they seem to be performing much more like a 20-year-old than the relatives, which we also brought here, and they performing more like a 50, 60, 70-year-old cognitively, right? So, so I think lots of the things that were shown for mice are shown for people. And we just published the last paper. Everybody said, maybe they're protected from diabetes, cancer, and cognitive decline, but maybe they have more cardiovascular disease. But it turns out they don't. After spending a number of years and bringing cardiologists to Ecuador, they turn out to have less plaques in the arteries, and overall they seem to be doing better, right? So just a single mutation that has this power of completely changing the disease phenotype. They never develop. I mean, after 50 or 60 years, I think in the first 50 years of following, one person died of cancer, and so many of them were in their 70s, 80s, never seen Alzheimer's. In any of them, right? And yet people in Ecuador have Alzheimer's.
I love this pathway. It's so fascinating. Just thinking about growth hormone signaling and how important that seems to be. I'm so curious what your thoughts are. I know there's been a lot of studies on growth hormone, IGF-1, and things that may raise that. What are your thoughts on that?
This is probably something very fundamental, meaning that the growth and pro-growth, pro-reproduction, the fact that everything is converging on these pathways, it probably has to do with making decisions, right? Entering different programs. So you can have a program where you're going to grow fast, have lots of offspring, and get out of the way, or you can have a standby program where you are blocking everything, blocking growth, blocking reproduction. So it makes sense in evolution. It is very clear if you look at a yeast or a bacteria. Bacteria and yeast enter stationary phase, right? In fact, if you look at yeast, they can do three things. They can be in the fast lane, right? And they live for a few days, or can be in stationary phase and they lower their metabolism. They standby, they can go for weeks, or they can go enter what's called a spore state, and they can live for years, right? So between the shortest and the longest, it's 100-fold lifespan difference, right? So it's really remarkable. So that teaches you that, at least in some organisms, have a predisposed selection of three different programs: 3 days, 3 weeks, 600 days, right? That's probably why growth hormone works so well, because it's not quite what we see in yeast, but it's like you could live like this or like that. Where we can exploit it is to say, well, we're not growing after a certain age.
Right.
Most people don't reproduce more than a couple times. So why are we spending all this energy being in this high reproduction, high growth mode?
Right.
We could just be in this maintenance mode and maybe live a lot longer,
Be
a lot healthier. Right? So that switch is, I think that, especially if that switch is already, because you can biohack your way to longevity, but it's very difficult to do that and not cause damage.
Right.
But if it's already something that is evolved for that purpose of protecting you when you don't need to reproduce or grow, then that's it. That's a switch, all right, once you find that switch. So growth hormone is probably one of those switches. But now the question is how early you have to switch it on. It may be that you have to switch it on fairly early. And some of the other ones, like rapamycin and TOR, they don't seem to be that early because, you know, the studies that have been done in mice, they started at middle age. They started intervening with the drug middle age. So it means that at least TOR, blocking TOR is still effective even later. As a master switch.
Okay.
But growth hormone seems to be, at least the data suggests that you may have to intervene earlier to make the selection between lifespans.
So the dietary patterns that help with this growth hormone regulation, fasting versus longevity diet, like what are the impacts?
I mean, proteins, essential amino acids are the ones that are most powerful in keeping growth hormone high, in keeping IGF-1 high. If you reduce protein levels, and particularly if you have plant-based proteins, the plant-based protein, like let's say the legumes, have much lower levels of these amino acids that are pushing growth factors, right?
That's interesting.
And so I mean, of course, you don't want to have, let's say, legumes have much lower. So you don't want to have only legumes because then you get too low. Because you could look at a 5-fold difference between levels in animal protein and a plant-based protein.
Okay.
So you probably want to be more on the side of the plant. But
which are the amino acids that you're thinking about? That
it's like leucine, methionine.
Oh, which are
right?
lower in plant. Some plants.
Well, not necessarily in plant.
Or legumes.
In legumes. Like for example, nuts and seeds, they can have a fairly high level of. So plant-based proteins, they have fairly high levels of these amino acids, but some plant-based proteins have very low, right? So you have to know, and you have to mix them to get, say, in between, right? Because you don't want to go to the levels of animals because then you get the problems that the animal proteins cause. But you also don't want to be malnourished because now you have so little that that could, cause the opposite problem.
So we're talking about amino acids that alter growth hormone signaling, right? But what about animal proteins themselves, especially in these factory farmed animals, where are they getting growth hormone exogenously? Is that also playing into some of these results we're seeing that could be impacting?
Growth hormone is probably going to be difficult to absorb, right? So, but some of the steroid hormones, they could be absorbed, right? So, a lot of the protein-based hormones are probably not going to make it through.
They'll get degraded.
They get degraded, yeah. Some others will not get degraded. They could definitely contribute to lots of problems. So that's something that we always want to investigate. We never got around to, but it's a very interesting topic, what animals get fed.
Exactly.
And how whether it's antibiotics or hormones. How is that going to affect somebody especially somebody that consumes a lot of it?
And I think in addition, thinking about, like even dairy products, right? I mean, these are pregnant cows that are pumped up. I mean, their blood is coursing with hormones, a lot of these steroid, estrogens, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly right. So all the hormones that can make it into the bloodstream of whoever consumes them, that should be a major concern, right? Then we should know a lot more about it and should be a lot more regulated so that, of course, you don't inherit whatever is being given to the animals.
I mean, the other thing, I'm sure you've thought about this, I've been thinking about it a lot, but just the whole concept of bioaccumulation. There are persistent organic pollutants, there are other things that tend to accumulate, they're fat soluble, right? Lipophilic compounds that tend to go to fat tissue. And so that's another component I've been thinking about. When you're eating a lot of these animal products that are higher in fat, are you also getting a lot of these other toxins and things that we may not want to be consuming?
The animal products have a double problem, right? So they have that plus the other problems.
Yeah.
But the plant-based products also have the problem, right? I always say, for example, you can have brown rice and it contains arsenic, right? Now there's new data on plant proteins having high levels of lead. I'm not so crazy about having teams, right? Like I'm on the plant team and I'm on the animal team.
Yeah.
I think we should be more like, there's problems everywhere, and way more problems with the animal because of what they contain and also the consequence on the environment, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
So fine, but then we shouldn't make it that the plant-based sources are perfect, because they're not, right? And they have a lot of problems. So I think it's important that soon we come up with food purity standards, because everything is so contaminated. And I always say, one thing that I always recommend is rotation, right?
Yeah.
Rotate. Don't eat the same things more than once or twice a week, because so many things are contaminated. And if you keep eating the same thing, let's say brown rice, eventually you might get arsenic poisoning, right? So this is true for so many things, and people shouldn't think, now I cannot eat anything. No, you can, but just some
moderation.
Rules can protect you from getting toxic levels of lots of things.
Well, I always think about detoxification diets, and they're all plants, right? Like the things like the sulforaphane that are in broccoli and cruciferous vegetables that are helping our liver to detoxify these things, or fiber is helping us to excrete things.
You can look at it like that, or you can look at the opposite way. You can say, the tomato skin, it could be pro-inflammatory. The potato skin could be pro-inflammatory. So many, the fruits, a lot of them have inflammatory components. The seeds in tomato, the seed in food. I'm from southern Italy. I mean, my parents and my grandparents from southern Italy. And in the old days, there were a lot of rules and seasonality. So people knew you eat this fruit at this time of the year in these doses. So now we're losing all of that, right? And there's no more, let me teach you the correct way to eat this and the moment and when you're gonna pick it. And of course, again, with the animal-based products is a huge concern. But also with the plant-based products, there are issues we need to be very knowledgeable of to make sure that people don't go from one problem to the other.
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about plastics, but that's a whole other thing. So let's maybe shift back. I don't know, Chris, do you want to jump in?
So I have a question about the paper that you wrote 11 years ago with Morgan Levine. It's pretty provocative. I think I became aware of it on Simon Hill's podcast when you were on there, and you said, if you eat animal protein and you're below a certain age where IGF-1 increases, you have something like a 300 or 400% higher chance of getting cancer at those ages if you're eating a lot of animal protein.
Yeah.
But I think you also said with plant protein, people are taking protein powders, they're worried about their protein content, so they're trying to supplement. So they also have an increased...
Yeah, it was, I think, 400% increased risk for those that had high animal protein intake, and it was 300% in those that had high plant-based protein. But for overall mortality, it was cancer mortality. For overall mortality, the high plant effect went away, right? It was about a 75% increase in risk of all-cause mortality in those that had high animal-based proteins, but those compared to the ones that had low, so more than 20% of calories came from proteins versus less than 10% of calories came from protein. For overall mortality, the high plant-based and the low plant-based group had about the same risk, right? So it didn't increase anymore. So it was it seemed to be a cancer-specific effect of the high plant-based protein, but not for overall mortality.
So I got a question for you, and if you don't mind, I'm going to walk around with this camera to show you. You haven't seen this in a podcast before. That's the paper, right?
Yep.
And these are the charts that go with it. Can you just explain those charts?
Yeah, so basically this is showing how, at least for cancer, all-cause mortality in cancer, you see the risk of high protein intake crossing over around age 65 to 70, right? So if somebody is reporting a high protein intake, before age 65, that's usually associated with all-cause mortality and a major increase in cancer mortality. Now, if you ask an 80-year-old, or at least in the enhanced database responded, I have a very low protein intake, they usually did worse, right? They did worse than those at the high, moderate to high protein intake. What is the reason for that? We don't know, but certainly it could be malnourishment. So maybe a lot of people that responded, I have a very low protein intake, and they're 78, they were not nourished properly, right? Or they were frail, or may have been a consequence of a problem. So they were sick, and because they were sick, they were not eating proteins anymore. Yeah, so it could be a lot of reasons. I don't think it's about the argument. This is not necessarily true, but it's not a good sign for having a very low protein intake when you're old, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but it may be that if you had a low protein intake, but you were very careful, it could still be benefiting from that low protein intake. But yeah, so I think this is real here, meaning high protein. Up to age 65, 70, 75, it's not good. But that part about old people, so I think if somebody's older, if they had enough, they could still benefit compared to somebody that has too much.
I got another one for you. Okay. Are you familiar with this paper that came out from Harvard? And
very familiar.
You're very familiar?
Yes.
So
I just published with Frank.
Oh, you did?
And we will publish a follow-up paper, yeah.
The Frank that Valter just referred to is Frank Hu from Harvard. And the paper they just published is from the Journal of Nutrition, Dietary Amino Acids and Risk of Stroke Subtypes, listing specific amino acids with specific types of strokes. If you're into ranking scientists by how often they're cited by other scientists, then this list of authors is an all-star cast. Walter Willett is the most cited scientist in all of medicine. Joanne Manson and Frank Hu are in the top 10. Valter published a highly cited paper with them 9 years ago in JAMA, Association of Animal and Plant Protein Intake with All-Cause and Cause-Specific Mortality. Back then, they used the word protein instead of zooming in on specific amino acids.
So I love this paper, and I'm going to interview them. And I especially love these heat maps.
Yeah.
And I thought of you when I saw this heat map, because I thought, Longo seems to be going for sort of on the lower protein side. Watch your protein. Fruit is number one on the list, the lowest protein food. And vegetable oils, which I didn't used to think would be very good for you, is 0 protein. And they're up there in the green. And I'm noticing fish, which you sort of, seafood, which you have promoted in the past for older people a couple times a week, is getting into the pink.
Yeah.
So do you believe this data? What do you think about this data? Does it change any of your views?
This is one pillar, right? Meaning this epidemiology. And so I think it's great. If you look at the group that won, it's very, very similar to the longevity diet, right?
Yeah,
longevity diet.
That's why I thought of you.
Yeah, so I loved it, and I loved also the fatness paper from Norway, looking at a couple million people in China, Europe, and the United States. And there again, it seems like exactly on the longevity diet, with few changes here and there. I think then you have to take this and you have to look around the world, right? You have to look at Okinawa, Loma Linda, Southern Italy. You'll have to look at the mice, the rats, the monkeys. I'm more respectful of the epidemiology than any other pillars, right? But it's one of the 5, right? And so then, yes, and then you go to work and you say, okay, how do we go from there to something even more solid? Because, in epidemiology, and I've published a number of epidemiological papers. I'm not an epidemiologist, but it's a lot of it is what groups you pick, right? Who you comparing? How you select the group, right? So if you select different groups, you get different results. So I think it's great, and I agree with everything because it's data, right? But but then I say the fruit, for example, is a recommendation. This was like looking at your chances to make it to 70 or 75 healthy. We're looking at making it to 110 healthy, right? So you got another 40 years to go, right? So 70 actually turns out to be this cutoff, what you see here, right? That's a cutoff. So basically they're saying, how do you get to this point? We're saying, I got to get you out here, right? And now the fish that may not be so important here may become very important there. For example, Emma Morano, who became the oldest person in the world, 117. I followed her from 112 to 117. In 100 years of age, and of course the New York Times went crazy with this because, they contacted me one time saying, oh, you see, Emma Morano eats raw meat, red meat every day. And I said, this is great. And they couldn't believe it. And I said, she started at 100. Right? So Carlo Bava, our physician, did absolutely the right thing, right? Because at 100 years of age, he thought, what is the biggest enemy? The biggest enemy was not cancer. The biggest enemy was probably an infection and her dying because she did not have enough basic nutrients. So that's like when you put it all together, you want to have an understanding of this, and this is really, I'm using it all the time, right? And I love what Frank and the people at Harvard are doing. But then you want to look at, for example, in history, what's the only way that you can make a mouse or a rat live longer without calorie restricting them? Protein restriction, amino acid restriction, right? That's the only way you get there. But
and
then again,
there's particular amino acids like methionine.
Well, methionine is the number one. Not just methionine, it's also other amino acids. But methionine is the one by far that is the most effective if restricted. But then again, if you take a mouse that is old, and we've done it with the mice, right? So we taken young mice and we put on a 4% protein diet. And then we take old mice and nothing happens. You keep in 30 days on an extremely low protein diet and nothing happens. Then you take old mice and you put them on the same extremely low protein diet and they lose weight very rapidly, right? So that's what the human data is suggesting. And that's where now you want to maybe not just have fish, you could do it two ways, right? If you're 80-year-old or 75-year-old, you could do it two ways. Either you go back to more of a Mediterranean diet that allows white meat and red meat and so on, right? And this is what the centenarians in Italy did. Or you really need, if you want to be vegan, you can, but it's a job, right? You really need to pay attention, and it's a daily effort to get there. Make sure you get the right amino acids and nutrients and all of that. So I think we just have to bring in this multi-pillar science, and this multi-pillar science is very protective of everyone. I think, including the 100-year-old. The pillar for Emma Morano was red meat and 3 eggs a day, by the way, right? So raw red meat and 3 eggs a day, but after age 100.
Okay.
So when we get to 100, I'm going to start eating eggs. So, Valter,
but even before 100, if you look at the New England study, it suggested less than 3 eggs a week. More than 3 eggs a week, that's when you start to get into trouble, right? So same thing for alcohol, up to 3 or 4 glasses a week. I have some colleagues here that they don't like me to say that, but that's what the data shows. 3-4 glasses a week, you're okay. You get past that, and then you start getting into the trouble zone. Yeah.
So, Valter, did you expect legumes to be as low as they are on that list?
Well, I mean,
legumes are way down there. I mean, the blue zones.
Nuts and legumes are here, right? So,
yeah. I didn't see that. Nuts and legumes. But what are legumes doing down here?
Well, I think it's probably people that only did legumes and not nuts, right?
So they were deficient.
But now keep in mind, in the fatness paper, the legumes were on top of everything by far, right? So so you have to look at all the studies. I mean, this is a particularly good one, and Harvard has done an incredible job. But again, you can't just look at one paper. You have to say, okay, what keeps coming up? And fruit, for example, right? Fruit is great, except that if you do this and if you say fruit is the best thing you can have, you can start having 6 bananas a day. And now if you're already overweight, as 75% of Americans and 60% of Europeans, that 6 bananas a day could be devastating for you, right? And you say, well, okay, but that says that people that are the healthiest have a lot of fruit. It's more complicated than that. And so that's why it's not necessarily moderation, because in some cases you can eat a lot. but not fruit, right? So, and not fruit with high fructose levels, right? So I think it's just understanding of what are we dealing with, and and eventually having people. I think both in the United States and in Italy, we're talking about we need a new generation of PhDs that have extensive training in nutrition, lifestyle, and that can be next to the doctor and have that kind of expertise and training, right? We don't have that, right? Right now, I mean, we started a registered dietitian program here, but it's not enough. You can, they're not trained like a doctor is trained, right? With all these different steps and difficulties and selective process. This is so important. I think we need a new class of healthcare professionals that are just lifestyle doctors, and they're just going to make it happen for people, right? Right now, who do you go to?
You are preaching
physician
to the
may
choir.
Yes.
Yeah,
All right.
There you go, yeah.
So I got another question for you.
Oh, here comes.
Let's go to the red zone. Why are red meats way down there in the bottom next to trans fat? That's not a very distinguished place to be, and the carnivores say it's the best. It's the best food in the world. It cures all diseases and has no nutrient deficiencies.
I mean,
what's wrong with you, Walter? Why don't you know that?
We live in an entertainment world, right? And so I think people at some point stop listening to multi-pillar science. And I don't mean science in the sense I'm in the lab, I work with test tube. I mean clinical trial, epidemiological data, centenarian studies, like that kind of science. The type of science that, yes, uses the basic, but uses also the very applied, the very much in the field type of research. Yeah, so a nice entertainment, right? And entertainers love to talk about, whatever it is that comes to their head, whether they have training or not. And most of the ones that are pushing this are not trained. They're not the healthcare professional that have 20, 30 years of training in lifestyle medicine, in lifestyle science. And unfortunately, then slowly these entertainers become the voices that people listen to, and they pick and choose, right? They pick and choose papers that they might look at my paper and come up with something that may or may not be true, and they criticize it, and people believe it, right? And they say, well, this is not valid because of this, right? Now they forget the other 300 papers that I discussed, but they pick the one, even with some criticism that might not be valid, convince their audience that you should eat a lot of meat because paleo people used to eat a lot of meat.
So to get serious about red meat, why? Why is it down there? Why does it stand out? Is it the heme iron? Is it the new 5G? Is it the mTOR? Is it the lack of fiber?
If you look at all the data, I would say number one factor is going to be the amino acids, right? I always start with this slide like I did this morning, right? Because of my interest in aging, I often start with this slide. And these are the risk factor for cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's. And you see smoking and obesity keep coming up as the major risk factors for these diseases. And of course, there are major risk factors for all kinds of diseases. And then I was struck by this slide that a friend of mine, Matt Chamberlain, gave to me, which is, look at what happens, this smoking and obesity compared to 30 years of aging, right? So almost disappear. And if you think about smoking and obesity in terms of a building, imagine a 4-story building, and being smoking and obesity, and the aging, 30 years of aging, are the Empire State Building, right? So they almost completely disappear. It doesn't mean that obesity and smoking are not important and we should eliminate them, but just to put them in comparison with how powerful the aging process is in driving lots and lots of diseases. Even obesity and smoking, which we all recognize as so central for lifespan, they disappear compared to 30 years of aging. So what does that mean? That the biggest factor for any one food is if it's accelerating the aging process, yeah. That's going to cause by far the biggest problem, right? I think is the amino acid composition is probably number one. And then, heme and lots of other things that.
What about the saturated fat profile?
The association, like, is it contaminated? Does it have steroids? Does it have antibiotics in it? There's probably a lot of cofactors that make that amino acid composition even worse. If you think about a legume, you may get about 10% in protein. If you think of a steak, that's about 25% protein. So it doesn't, that's another factor. It doesn't take a lot of meat to get a lot of proteins. And then the protein might have, compared to a legume protein, might have 5 times more amino acids, right? So now it's 2.5 times more protein dense, and it has 5 times more of a specific amino acid. So you see how you can get to 10, 20-fold difference very quickly if you're thinking about the same volume of food, right? Yeah, so now when you get into 10, 20-fold differences, you can see how you can get into trouble very quickly. And now the problem, what we saw in Italy, is that, which we were very surprised. We looked at children. I wrote a book about children and health, and longevity. You have to start as a child, live long. What we noticed was that they were eating, in some age ranges, 2 to 3 times more proteins than recommended by every pediatric association in the world. So what was happening was they were eating proteins in the morning, then they were going to school and they were getting some type of meat, right? Then they were going home and they were getting some type of meat. And the meat that they got for lunch and they meat in school lunches, right? And the meat they got at dinner often was something at least in between what they should have based on size and what an adult size is, right? So this justifies the 2 to 3 fold, right? This is crazy, right? It's particularly crazy when then you see these 30-year-olds now getting colorectal cancer, getting breast cancer.
Oh my God,
and
yes.
If you do what we do, we have to wonder, it's gotta be proteins that if you see these 2 to 3 fold, and not that I recommend, but the pediatric associations recommend, then you have to wonder, is this it? Is this what's happening? They have so much protein so early. I mean, you cannot turn on TV right now without hearing about, protein and supplements and high protein yogurt and high protein everything.
On the Health Watch this morning, protein supplements are becoming wildly popular. Athletes use them all the time, and now we're seeing more kids taking them.
Protein for Kids is a comprehensive food powder that readily mixes with milk or water.
My youngest son, who's now 5, but when he was like 3, I don't know, for whatever reason, he just fixated on protein. He has become the protein police of the preschool. So he walks around and he looks at kids' snacks and he's like, that doesn't have protein. That granola bar does not have protein. That has protein.
So in terms of relative contribution to the issue of obesity, diabetes, all the metabolic syndrome, do you think protein versus carbs, or I should say simple carbs, protein versus simple carbs, which is a bigger offender?
I don't think...
or they equal?
I think, of course, sugars can be bad, but I think that it's more, are you burning all the sugars that you're taking in? If you look at a bowl of rice, white rice, it's like, a bunch of spoons of sugar. It gets into the bloodstream at the same speed, and it ends up being the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think we could talk about sugars without talking about white rice or bread or potatoes, right? It's the same, right? It's very similar. It's not much more than a potato gives you than a spoon of sugar.
Right.
So absolutely you need to limit that, and you want to prefer having complex carbohydrates that are very difficult, and they come with a lot of nourishment, like the vegetable type of carbohydrate.
Yeah.
But if you look at the centenarians in Italy or Okinawa, the Okinawans had 70% of the calories came from sweet potatoes, right?
Right.
That's, you can argue, a pretty good dose of sugar per day. They still had the record longevity in the world for a long time. I would be much more worried about too much sugar and starches that then lead to insulin resistance and obesity than having the right amount of starches which you burn by the end of the day, and they never turn out to either cause insulin resistance nor cause fat storage. So I would say that I don't think we should demonize either proteins or sugars or starches. I think it's more understanding what we're talking about and personalizing and saying, okay, to you, you're an athlete, you're running 20 miles a day, the sugar is probably good for you, right?
Right, it's needed, versus...
you're pre-diabetic, you already have 20 pounds of extra visceral fat.
High insulin.
You probably shouldn't have the bananas, right?
Right.
or it doesn't even matter. It could be apples. You could be 6 apples, right? The sort of like, it keeps the doctor away, right? So, but those 6 apples, I mean, an extra apple per day, right? If it's extra calories, eventually you can end up in 30 pounds overweight, right? And diabetic. It's just 1 extra apple per day, right? So that's what's missing, right? Instead of saying, this is good, this is bad, it's more like, okay, yes, certain things, of course, are going to be at the bottom. Avoid it, trans fats and processed meats and all of that. Try to avoid it as much as possible. But, also understand that, if you're 100 years old and you're Emma Morano, even this processed meat might be a good thing for you. Right?
If
it
you're
might just prevent
sarcopenic.
that infection or that immunosuppression that then fails to protect you when the virus infection comes out and kills you.
Right.
I got one more paper to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's great.
Are you familiar with that paper?
You're getting interrogated here.
Because your buddy Simon has a bone to pick with you and me.
Yeah, I think I've seen this.
So this is another Harvard paper from the Nurses' Health Study. Frank's name is on there, and Walter, I don't know if Frank's on there, but Keyson and Walter.
Yeah, so tell me what the...
Yeah, so the issue is they were looking at the difference between animal protein and plant protein in terms of the health effects. And they had a conclusion in the paper about how every extra amount of animal protein increased your odds of chronic disease by quite a dramatic amount, but not for plant protein.
Yeah.
So for plant protein, it looked like added protein compared to the other food groups was a good thing, whereas it was very mixed with dairy protein and total protein.
Well, I can tell you we are about to publish together an explanation for this, right? Which I cannot, no, because it's a very nice paper. It took us 6 years to come up with. It's mouse and this database, right? And 3 databases from Harvard, together with Frank, who, and I'm not going to get into it because then we give away what we're about to publish. The explanation is not, I hope Frank is being convinced that maybe there is an alternative explanation to what is being proposed so far, which has been the plant-based sources contain a lot of good things, phytochemicals, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, probably, but I think it's bigger reasons for it, which we'll see. We'll see.
So the reason for putting you on the spot is my friend Simon and I have a little bit of a different perspective on protein. He did a masterclass on protein, and he had Stu Phillips and a bunch of other, Christopher Gardner, and a bunch of other people in there, and you're one of them. You're in that episode. And you're talking about your paper with Morgan Levine about how animal protein increases your odds of cancer by a lot, plant protein by less, but still. He said to you, I want the best of both worlds. I want to be ripped, which he is, and I want to live long. And you said, well, you can have one or the other. You can be an Olympic athlete or you can live to 110, but I'm designing you to live to 110. So he was torn, and he looked at that paper and said, oh no, more plant protein means longer life based on that paper. So what he's recommending to his audience is 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. I know you're down to 0.8 or 1 or something like that.
We're going to make the case soon enough that proteins doesn't mean anything, right? Doesn't mean anything. It cannot mean anything when you can have a 5-10-fold difference between some ingredients, components of amino acids in it, in one source or another. So I know that this is a headache for everybody, but I mean, we're also getting to the point where we have application artificial intelligence. So, very soon, within a year or two, it's going to be very easy. So we need to move away from proteins, right? It's meaningless. The word protein is meaningless. It's just really an amino acid profile. So high protein, low protein, doesn't mean anything, And I know that everybody wants, especially in the entertainment world, everybody wants to have, simple thing, high this, low this,
carb,
avoid
protein,
that. This is why I'm saying it's going to take us not very long to have it precisely, so somebody doesn't have to go crazy and say, well, I don't know what you mean. What shall I do? Well, right now, either get a PhD nutritionist or somebody that is high level that knows all of this and follows all of us, or you might have to wait a year or two. It's not going to be more than 2 years. we're going to have applications that tell you exactly what we're talking about. We're doing it, but others are doing it. It shouldn't be about proteins. It should be about what they contain and what they do. Then eventually it should be about what they contain and what they do to you.
Right. I love it.
I'm surprised at my own answer, and I'm surprised that I say that, because usually I say you don't need a high protein diet to be muscular. There's a number of papers showing that if you have 30 grams of good quality proteins,
Right.
you maximize your muscle synthesis. And so if you did that twice in a day, you will have more than plenty, right? So you don't need 1.2. Now, the 1.2 could be not enough if all of it was from legumes.
But people usually don't just eat legumes, they eat,
Yeah, right, but I
and-
don't know whether, so the recommendation, it could be 2.2 or 0.8, or because some bodybuilder out there might say, I just eat legumes and I eat 1.2. And I would say, yeah, you're gonna struggle, right? With 1.2 of only legumes, you're gonna have a difficult time building muscle.
Eat that Blue Zones handful of nuts every day, you'll be okay.
And then maybe not training the right way. If you were having a balanced diet, a balanced composition of proteins, you need 0.8. With 0.8, you can get all the muscle you want. Maybe a little bit, just slightly more difficult than somebody that has excess proteins.
But this is where that University of Illinois paper comes in that just came out about the fact that plant and animal protein had no difference in terms of muscle building based on the deuterium labeling.
Probably because they follow groups that, so if you have a good combination of seeds, nuts, and legumes, that usually gets rid of the problem.
Totally. I interrupted you.
No, I was just going to accost him on the final paper from your colleague Luigi Fontana, but it's a good paper, and you've already said it all about methionine, so I've taken way too much time.
No, it's great. That's great.
I'm just going to sit back and enjoy the rest of this interview while the two of you talk.
No, but it's good. I mean, these are good questions, and I think you're doing the right thing by showing papers and asking questions, because that's what everybody should do.
That seemed like such a great paper to me. I know I'm supposed to stop talking, but there was another paper that came out from the low-carb community, and you probably don't follow it, Dave Feldman and Nick Norwitz and all those people. And they did a longitudinal study of a year for 100 people on a keto diet, and they measured plaque progression through Matt Budoff with a CT angiogram, so you could measure soft plaque with a dye and all that. What they thought they were going to see is, because these people were so healthy, they had low triglycerides, they had high HDL, they had BMIs of 22, and they were fit, so they were metabolically very healthy. So the hypothesis was there wasn't going to be much plaque progression. But actually, the median plaque progression, there was a lot of scatter, but the median was 18.8 cubic millimeters per year. That's a lot.
Which is a lot. Yeah.
That's a lot. And some of those people, it just went through the roof. So they had all kinds of hypotheses about plaque begets plaque. It must be, if you start with a lot of plaque, then you get a lot of plaque. But to me, it felt like inferring cause from...
I mean, for the low-carb diets, if you look at the Harvard studies, study after study after study is very consistent, is more problems. And then if you look at the longevity Lancet studies, it indicates if you have a low-carb diet, it's better to have an 80% carbohydrate diet than have a low-carb diet, as far as lifespan is concerned, right? Or life expectancy is concerned. So I would say it's pretty clear, right? These low-carb diets are okay short-term, maybe for weight loss
or for a specific medical condition like epilepsy.
Of course. So for specific reasons in short-term, but even short-term, there are better ways to get there. And so I will argue that you're better off getting there with the longevity diet and the FMD than with a keto diet. But I understand that some people want to go that way.
We just interviewed nutrition scientists who help with the dietary recommendations for the Nordic countries, Japan, Switzerland, Sweden, Canada, and so on. And Norway has it right on their dietary guidelines website that keto and low-carb diets are extreme diet fads. Avoid them.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree. And also because I always say I've never seen a centenarian that was on a low-carb diet.
They hardly make it to 90, early 80s maybe.
So I'll put my clinical hat on. I'm not an endocrinologist, but I definitely have had those brittle diabetics who are just incredibly insulin resistant, and even eating beans will spike their sugar. And so given that meat has a glycemic index of 0, they end up resorting to that keto diet. So I would love to kind of shift a little bit in terms of thinking about what would be your strategy, your recommendations for these incredibly resistant diabetics. Is this where FMD comes in?
When I made the FMD here at USC, I purposely put starches in there. And I put starches in there because I wanted to prevent what everybody thought I should have in there, which is, or the effects it should have, which is very high ketone bodies. So I didn't want high ketone bodies. Right? I wanted to have the ketone bodies go high, but not too high, because I didn't want this yo-yo. But then people start measuring glycemic effects of the FMD, and everybody's like, wow, you know, it spikes, and why would you have? I was laughing because we had all this data from diabetes, pre-diabetes, showing that it's incredible effects in reversing insulin resistance. But people were so sure that ketone bodies were the greatest thing you can have, and the glycemic peaks are the worst nightmare. And we were showing, keep the ketone bodies down and have the spikes. That's okay. That, in fact, we think, or at least is consistent with, that's what might have protected in our trials the people from losing muscle mass, is that glycemic peaks, right? So we don't know, but the glycemic peaks could be affecting, for example, TOR. It is possible that that is actually contributing to the prevention of muscle loss. It's speculation, I don't know, but we know that the peaks are there and they should stay there because it couldn't possibly work any better than it's working on people with advanced stage diabetes, pre-diabetes, name it, right? Trial after trial after trial. You saw that in my presentation. It just keeps on working, and not only is reversing or regressing diabetes, is reducing drug use in the diabetic population, right?
But the first trial, we did it. And so there was 2017, and there was 5 days fasting mimicking diet, once a month for 3 months, right? So, and the patient were asked to don't change anything in your, kind of like the mice that I showed you earlier, don't change anything in your lifestyle, just do the FMD. And so you see effects on body weight, abdominal fat, waist circumference, and lean body mass. Just like for the mice, now that's relative lean body mass is actually going up after FMD cycles, but the absolute stays the same, right? And then differently or very differently from chronic calorie restriction, we see these differential effects, right? So if you look at blood glucose, people that started with a normal glucose stay there, right? So if somebody started with 85 fasting glucose, didn't change very much. But the pre-diabetic, most of them return to the normal state, right? If you look at IGF-1, which I just told you is very central sort of marker for aging and diseases, those that had IGF-1 lower than 200 stay there, decreased a little bit, but those that the IGF-1 in the over 200 is a much larger drop. C-reactive protein, the same, those that normal didn't change.
Yes, so I don't know, people love to talk about autophagy, ketone bodies, glycemically. I don't know, it's like a fashion.
Well, and CGMs, right? Everyone's measuring.
Every couple of years there's a new word that everybody loves and everybody knows, and everybody on the street is like, oh, is your autophagy activated? I don't take a lot of these pseudo markers very seriously. I think you need to look at the 5 pillars, including clinical trials, and the clinical trials suggest that these glycemic peaks, if they're not exaggerated, probably. I mean, I wouldn't tell people eat spoons of sugar, that's good for you. But I mean, you know, some starches that have a peak here and there, probably not problematic. Now, if you did that 20 times a day, yes, but this is why we really like to say 4 times a day, breakfast, lunch, snack, dinner, within 12 hours, and then stop. There's protective measures against glycemic peaks, which if you did enough time, that could constitute a problem.
Got it. Where are you most excited about? So how much can you share about the data? I guess there's published data now, a lot of the FMD stuff that you've done, and then what's coming on the horizon. I'm curious to get your view of the landscape. This is pretty exciting.
In confidentially, we talked about some of the things that came out. For this, I can say that there's going to be exciting data on autoimmunities and inflammatory diseases. That's a fair statement. We cannot go into the details of that, but we're going to see 3 or 4 papers, major universities, including yours, talking about FMD and inflammatory diseases. So great, we've been working on it for a long time. We publish in mice, all these things. So that's one. And for diabetes and kidney disease and liver fat. And so in the next year or so, I think we're going to have enough data to show that the FMD doesn't just affect insulin resistance and diabetes, but all the problems associated with it, or certainly connected to it, let's say hypertension drugs, liver fat, kidney damage.
Neuropathy.
Yeah, maybe neuropathies. And we're going to start seeing more and more papers are no muscle loss or muscle protected. So that's what we're excited about, what we always been preaching, which is treat aging. And so if that's true, then you shouldn't just see the effect on diabetes. You're making the person younger. If the person is 62, is it looking more like when that person was much younger? Overall, much younger, probably didn't have high cholesterol. Is the cholesterol down now? Didn't have hypertension. Is the hypertension down? Did not have fatty liver. Is it down? You have more functional kidneys. Is that happening? In the next 12 months, we're starting to see this 360 set of clinical trials by independent universities that support this notion of treat aging. And that's what medicine should be doing, should have been doing a long time ago, in addition to all the good things that medicine does. But certainly at the preventive level, the treat aging is by far the best way to go. Yeah.
Do you think the main mechanism, I guess there's multiple, right? I'm just thinking about mechanisms of FMD. It's the metabolic aspects of it, but also the stem cell, right? Like the whole Yamanaka factor, stem cell regeneration organ. Are you seeing reversal of like fibrosis, for example? I'm just thinking about end stage inflammation leading to fibrosis. Is there any reversal in organ remodeling types of?
We've seen it in mice. So for example, we've done papers with immunotherapy and some of these treatment in mice that cause fibrosis.
Yeah.
And so we see the fasting mimicking diet protecting against that. Now, there's no, as far as I know, no trials that are close to being finished. So there are discussions now of trials that may be relevant, but there's a critical mass of FMD papers, which are surprisingly positive. And so we're hoping that now attracts everybody else, says, hey, I want to test it for fibrosis.
Totally.
And now the good news, the company, because I'm sort of forcing them to do so, is providing it for free. So anybody that says, I want to test it, I have patients, doesn't really cost me anything, let me try it.
The company Valter is talking about is L-Nutra, and they make the fasting mimicking kit diet boxes called Prolon. I recoiled a few years ago when I heard Valter founded that company. Haven't we seen enough grifters cashing in on selling supplements or ultra-processed protein bars? And I didn't like all the packaging, so I went and searched for recipes to make our own FMD diet. But Tamiko pointed out to me that the kits standardize the diet, which is important in analyzing the results and comparing how different people responded. Point taken. And it turns out Valter donates 100% of his proceeds to the Create Cures Foundation and his own foundation, both of which do awesome things. I had simply jumped to conclusions, and now you can count me in as an admirer and as someone who's going to spend a lot of time with crayons and grandkids coloring in the Valter Longo Foundation coloring book.
And it is what it is. If it's a negative result, that's great. I mean, that's another thing I've been pushing the company to do, is let the universities test it, and whatever comes out, it comes out. I mean, they don't have an agenda, so they're going to publish what they see and what the data shows.
Are these potentially going to be regulatory label-enabling studies, do you think? As a drug developer, I'm thinking about what does the FDA require, what bar, what level of evidence in order to get, because I'm thinking if this gets approved from the FDA, that's going to open the floodgates. That's going to be game-changing.
I hope it's going to be a game changer without the approval from the FDA, because the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is food and drug, right? And the FDA is basically told us in the FDA pages, if it's grass, if it's food, and you don't make a claim directly from a product to a disease, but it's more of a lifestyle. So, for example, the fasting mimicking diet as part of a lifestyle program regresses diabetes. The FDA is generally fine with that, as long as it's part of a lifestyle program. Now, to be convincing, it's not really about FDA, it's about having the large trials that are being, so now I'm trying to get a 500-600 patient trial on diabetes, focus on diabetes with 4 or 5 big universities, completely independent, not paid by a company, but paid by government grants or foundation grants. Those are needed, and then I think the FDA can always say, well, I think this should be FDA approved. The problem with that is the FDA does not have a track for food as medicine. There's a botanical drug, but it's very different. Botanical drug to the FDA
it's one
means
substance.
Yeah, one substance And how do you make, so we talked to the FDA, I talked to the FDA, and they say, you're gonna have to make it into 7 ingredients and then have them all pure. And the problem is, how do you make cancer patients or diabetes patients eat the same food for 5 days over and over and over?
But you've done it with Prolon.
No, Prolon has got 60 components, right? So yeah, we would love to go to the FDA and say, sure, keep it like that. We recognize it's a completely new category of medicine, right? So leave it like that, standardize it, will help come up with, but you cannot have the same standard as a botanical drug because it would be so ridiculously expensive and complicated. They will have to come up with a new category of medicine, which is like food as medicine. So as long as you show me the standard, because it's not so much about the exact repeatable molecule, but it's more like the general composition, or the composition needs to be the same, but we will have to make the case that small changes here and there are not going to be consequential for the efficacy of the intervention in the market. Right now it's an impossible situation because they don't have that. And then who wants to be the one that changes the FDA, right?
We should talk offline. But I think the fact that there's the cell therapy field that's exploded, right? Like there was never a path, and now you've got CAR T cells and going crazy, right? And that was never an entity.
I agree with you. Then again, it could be very expensive if it doesn't resolve quickly. If you get in there, it's one thing is to run 3 or 4 trials and have 1,000 patients or 1,500 patients now represented in the trial. And every doctor in the world is going to look at it and say, it's safe, it's grass, it's been tested on 1,500 patients. Absolutely, it's been published in a major journal. I mean, most of these papers have been published in top journals. And one thing is to go out and convince the FDA that they need to have a new branch. Absolutely, I'm ready for it, but I think you're looking at 5 or 6 years just to have that category being considered seriously.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Well, anyway, exciting to think about it because I know the data looks promising. So, question for you about the studies that have been positive. Have you gone back and looked at, I know you're very focused on FMD, 5 days, and then do whatever you want in between. Have you gone back and looked at the different qualities of diets that people have been on in their intervening times and how that's affected the outcome?
We haven't done that, but Leiden did that in the 100-patient clinical trial on diabetes. And so they looked at nutrition in the year, and they looked at lifestyle, exercise. And the only thing they changed, so there was no significant changes in nutrition. So people did not change their diet.
But you captured what their baseline diets were. So did some have bad diets and some have really bad and some have good diets? Or
they were diabetics, right? So I would assume that most of them did not have a great diet. But no, I mean, the point was, did they change or did they not change? Was the fasting mimicking diet working because it made them change diet? Or was it working because it works independently of the lifestyle change? So it worked independently of the lifestyle change. It's very clear. And also, the effects were not dependent or correlated with weight loss. So everybody says, of course, you lose weight, it did not correlate. And this is at least in 3 papers, I think, we keep seeing the same thing. It's not that those that lost most weight or most fat are the ones that had the benefit. No. So it's not about fat loss. It doesn't hurt probably to.
But you would expect them to lose weight, no? So not everyone loses weight?
No, they lose weight, but then you can look at correlations. You can sort of determine, was the weight loss and the fat loss what's responsible? So you should have a high correlation if it's responsible. So if you lost more fat, you have more reversal of diabetes. If you lost less fat, that was not the case. And that's what everybody assumed. So the FMD is working by multiple mechanisms. So we're seeing, at least in mice, activation of stem cells, cellular reprogramming, metabolic reprogramming, fat loss. Yeah, so probably all together is leading then to all these effects. Now, in the new trial, which we're about to finish in southern Italy, this is 500 people. It's the largest trial we've ever done. And this is looking at a controlled diet. Everybody has to be overweight and having some risk factors for diseases like high blood pressure or high cholesterol. And in that trial, we are collecting data before baseline nutrition and lifestyle, and then we keep following them. So that's going to be the first trial. And we're also collecting data on sleep. So we have these rings where we can understand their sleep behavior. We're going to do telomere length, we're going to do epigenetic clocks, we're going to do aging clocks. It's going to be an extensive trial, yeah.
That's awesome. Can we talk about cancer and autoimmunity? I'm curious, I think you've done, there's a published study on triple negative breast cancer, I think, if I'm recalling correctly. Mm-hmm. Were those patients on immunotherapy? Do you remember?
The new trial that Vernier is doing is also with immunotherapy. So it's FMD plus immunotherapy plus chemotherapy, I think, for triple negative. It's published 2 papers. One we just published a couple months ago. It was chemo plus FMD, chemo plus FMD plus metformin. Pathologic response was nearly twice as much, say 75% increase compared to chemo alone, to what's been published in many papers, so say 50 to 75%. But then they published another study a couple of years ago where they actually look at overall survival after 40 some months, and the median survival was almost twice if FMD plus chemo versus chemo alone.
How often? What was the dose of FMD? Was it monthly?
I forgot how many cycles, but they did a lot of cycles.
Yeah. So they did the cycle of FMD concurrent with the chemo, which I guess makes sense, right? Because that's where you would...
Concurrent with the chemo, yeah. Okay. Yeah, you want to do it concurrent with the chemo because that's where we see in animal studies the normal cells being protected from the chemo and the cancer cells being much more sensitized. Yeah.
So immunotherapy is such a different beast, and so that's why I'm kind of curious, like, how much is known, because I know triple negatives they've been giving immunotherapy too, and so
So I can tell you one thing: in mouse models, multiple one, immunotherapy does almost nothing to breast cancer. In fact, it does almost nothing to melanoma and does almost nothing to a lot of models. But the fasting mimicking diet, it's better than the immunotherapy alone. So it's interesting. It's mice, I understand.
Right.
So I'm not criticizing.
Right, and it doesn't recapitulate humans who are very responsive to immunotherapy.
Exactly. But I'm saying it's interesting, right, that in mice, a cycle of fasting mimicking diet works better than a cycle of immunotherapy in many different models. So when we combine it though with immunotherapy plus FMD, that's when we get even better effects.
So you're seeing synergy.
Yeah, so if we do immunotherapy alone, nothing happens. But if we do immunotherapy and we do a fasting mimicking diet, something happens, not big. Okay. But if you do immunotherapy plus FMD, now you see synergies. And same thing for chemotherapy. So you do chemotherapy alone, but chemotherapy is more similar to FMD. One cycle of FMD or one cycle of chemotherapy, which is remarkable, right? Because the FMD is a plant-based fasting mimicking diet. It's remarkable in 20 different cancer models, one cycle of FMD is on average about as good as one cycle of whatever chemotherapy is most effective for that particular cancer.
Amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. But now we shouldn't get too excited because we think that the best application is for like advanced stage metastatic, So the early cancers, I think we need more data to know, if somebody's stage 1 and they have a 98% chance of being cured, I would say wait until the clinical trials are completed and let's see, right? Yeah, we're paranoid, but it's always good to be paranoid. For metastatic and for every cancer where the oncologist is saying that nothing is working here and we don't really have a good solution for you.
Maybe go for pancreatic cancer and let's see what happens. I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, in mice works very well, right? The FMD.
That's where
fasting.
you should go. There's your,
Yeah. And now one of the papers, the Vernier and the Broad published at the National Cancer Institute in Milan, we did a trial on a fasting mimicking diet in 100 patients with all kinds of cancers, including immunotherapy. But out of the 100, I think about 20 were metastatic, advanced stage cancer. Out of those, 5 went into remission with the fasting mimicking diet. So they published a paper saying exceptional responses in metastatic cancers, and one of them was pancreatic. So the pancreatic at stage 4 cancer patient went into remission, which is, I mean, at least in their view, this was a skeptical group in the old days. This is not a group that was a part of my choir. So now they felt that it's fairly unusual. I mean, you could get 1 or 2, but get 5 people like that go from stage 4 to remission. Now, it doesn't mean anything, I understand that. It means that it's possible, right? If it was possible for these 5 out of 20, which is 25% of those that had advanced stage metastatic, and there was lung, pancreatic, breast, and colorectal.
Nice. That's impressive. All right, this is awesome. I don't expect you to know the answer to this, but I'm curious. Did you look at the immune-related adverse events with immunotherapy and FMD?
We did. So we published a paper or several papers in mice. And in mice, it's like in the triple negative breast cancer model, the mice were dying of immunotherapy. And when we did the FMD and you saw a lot of the granulocytes and different cells of the immune system going sky high. But the FMD brought them down and no deaths, right? They completely blocked the deaths. And that's one paper that we showed. In another paper, then we looked at heart damage, fibrosis, that was what I was mentioning earlier. In that case, also, there were major effects in preventing this.
The model, was it a cancer model?
It was a cancer model, yeah. It was an immunotherapy model, and it caused clear inflammatory responses, oxidative damage, and fibrosis in the heart. And the FMD was able to.
All right, we got to get some trials going.
I mean, the human trials, they're starting now. So USC is starting one with colorectal cancer and immunotherapy. Indiana University is doing one on lung cancer immunotherapy.
Awesome.
The National Cancer Institute in Milan is doing breast cancer and immunotherapy. Yeah, so, we'll see what happens. And hopefully they get good results and we can move to the next level.
That's super amazing. But if you went for pancreas, that would be like home run.
It's a good idea. Now the pancreas could respond both ways because the pancreas is an organ in which some cells can be activated by fasting and some cells can be shut down by fasting. So it's a little tricky organ, right? True. It could be that in some senses it accelerates it's like ketone bodies. Everybody thinks of ketone bodies as something that can block cancer growth, but some cancers love ketone bodies. So now if you have high levels of ketone bodies in a cancer that happens to love ketone bodies, you got a problem.
Has that been pretty well profiled, which cancers, because I think there's the thought of, some cancers really love sugar, hence eat a ketogenic diet, versus you're saying there's other cancers that like ketone. I mean, what do we?
So there are papers now that are addressing just that, the cancers that are ketone bodies. Now there are also papers, either they're out or they're coming out, showing the correlation between ketone body levels in populations and the chance of developing certain cancers. People that have high ketone bodies seem to have much more of certain cancers, which, of course, now it goes back to the ketogenic diet.
I was going to say, this needs to kind of get out there.
But then again, the majority of the cancers seem to be doing worse with the ketone bodies. So it means that a lot of cancers are hurt by ketone bodies and some cancers are helped by ketone bodies. I don't think this is the future in cancer research now. So I think the future in cancer research is all of this with technology. So now our latest paper and our follow-up papers in the next couple of years are going to be about what we call starvation escape pathways. So rapid identification of starvation escape pathways. So you impose a fasting mimicking diet. The normal cells go in one direction, the cancer cells go in the opposite direction. You use something called RNA-seq. For now, which we're already doing and it's working very well, you identify escape pathways and then you use drugs that are already available and FDA approved to target the escape path. I think that's the way to go. Eventually, you won't even need the cell. With AI, etc., you might be able to get to the prediction of what the escape pathways are and get pretty good predictions. And so we're working on that now, but that part is still, but I think this is so much more powerful than just using fasting, because you can tell how they're staying alive. And in the beginning, when we did that, we thought, who knows if it's going to work. But the signal that they give you is very clear. Let's say, in one paper we published a few years ago, PI3 kinase, AKT, and TOR were just very much activated. And then we target them with 3 drugs. And you see the cancer going from up very rapidly to down very rapidly.
Amazing.
So with the right funds, that's certainly one promise is technology plus what we call wild card effect. So you use the fasting mimicking diet as a wild card because it just disrupts the environment of any cancer cell. So some, like you say, like sugar, and some of them like amino acid, and some like growth factors, and some like ketone bodies. It doesn't matter what it is, you disrupt their environment. And even if they like ketone bodies, fine, because in the FMD you're gonna have ketone bodies up, but then the ketone bodies down. Right? And this is the difference, one big difference with the ketogenic diet treatment of cancer. If you have a steady environment and they like ketone bodies, now you got a problem. In the FMD cycles, you go way up. So some ketone, first of all, they will have to be able to grow with ketone bodies, but without lots of other things that we take away, which is not the case with the ketogenic diet. So they may, let's say, they like ketone bodies, but they also like one amino acid. If their one amino acid is down, it's still not going to grow. And then eventually ketone bodies are going to come down. So even if you proliferated and expanded the ketone body-dependent cells, now you're going to kill them because they don't have ketone bodies anymore. And they're not going to have ketone bodies for 1 or 2 months. That's the kind of strategic and tactical interventions to get them into trouble. And it's a little bit science fiction, but we think a lot of this can turn into cancer antibiotics, right?
Yeah.
And so I envision you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, you have cancer. And so we'll give you this cocktail. Let's see if it works. Come back in a month. Let's see if the cancer went away.
Yep.
I mean, think about in the days of antibiotics, people were dying of bacterial infections, right? So I think we're very close to, and yeah, maybe there is some wishful thinking, but I don't think so. I think that now as so much technology is converging with a lot of data, hopefully, we'll start being much more effective in reversing this rather than making it a little bit better, increasing the survival by 3%.
Totally. I know we're going over time, but I'm having so much fun. This is amazing.
I've been waiting for him to scream and run away.
I know, I know you're busy. We didn't talk at all about microbiome impacts. How much are you able to speak to that? I'm so curious.
Yeah, I mean, we've done it with mice. We've compared water-only fasting with fasting mimicking diet. And the fasting mimicking diet seem to work better for IBD models, so inflammatory bowel disease, in Crohn's colitis type of mouse models, seem to be working better because of microbiota modulation. There's a major increase in certain families of bacteria, and those seem to be important for the inflammatory effects or the anti-inflammatory effects of the FMD. Whereas the water-only fasting did not have a big effect. Of course, the FMD contains a lot of vegetables, a lot of prebiotics, which are then feeding the good. And they're prebiotics selected from longevity zones of the world that are known to have healthy microbiota and healthy guts. So I think there was a good decision because now the FMD is contributing not only by fasting mimicking properties, but by also providing prebiotic to feed the right bacteria instead of the inflammatory bacteria.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that before. And I guess the bacteria are like me. If I go on a 5-day water fast, I'm dead man walking, man. I don't know what it is about me, but I can't go 5 days on a water fast without just dying. So I've done your FMD, and even that's hard for me because I'm a bigger guy. And why do you have the same calorie allotment for Michelle or, and I'm a bigger guy, I'm 195 pounds, and I get 800 calories a day, and they get 800 calories a day. That's not fair.
Well, it is fair, right?
What do you mean it's fair? I don't like it.
Yeah, the reason is that usually, it'd be nice eventually to have something for everybody. But usually, if you have a 100-pound person, that 100-pound person, we cannot afford to have a proportional weight loss. We cannot bring it down 10 pounds. Now make it 90 pounds a person, right? Yeah, so then...
so it's okay for me to lose 10 pounds, but not for her.
Exactly.
Oh. You're saying I need to lose 10 pounds.
It's not just safety, but it's also, she probably doesn't need to lose the 10 pounds. She probably just needs the fasting mimicking effects, the composition, not much of a weight loss, and she's okay, right? Because she doesn't need to have, she's probably insulin sensitive already, lots of things are already in the right place. So it's okay to push her a little bit better, but not too much, because now we don't want to make it too insulin sensitive, right? Now, glucose is what I was showing today. Calorie restriction pushes everything down. FMD, if you're 75 fasting glucose, you stay 75. So if you're already 100 pounds, you stay 100 pounds. Right? We don't want you to go down. And it's working very well like that, right? So now probably over 1 million people have done the FMD. And so far, we don't have too many people ending up in the hospital. So
does it get easier? Does your body adjust?
It gets a lot easier, and we did this in the clinical trial. So we actually had surveys. How hard was it? So number one, the first one is by far the hardest. And so then the second one, but I always say it's kind of like if you did your first 10K run. Yeah. If you never ran before, you do the first 10K, it's hell. Every kilometer of that run is hell. You remember for the rest of your life. The second one is already 2 times easier. And by the time you get to the 10th one, it's like 10K, you're looking to do a marathon.
Is this why you skip lunch, because you adapted to it?
Yeah, I skip lunch, and I think lots of people should consider it because it doesn't violate the 12-hour rule. It doesn't violate the having breakfast. You need to have breakfast. Yeah. It seems to be very important. And I like, for the safety reason, to keep it at 12 hours. But then you only suffer for about a couple months to adapt. After you suffer for a couple months, it's just like the breakfast skippers. The breakfast skippers say, I don't need to have breakfast. It just happens to be the wrong meal that you're skipping. So I think that suffer for a couple months, get adapted, and then in my case, and I think it's a good idea, because there are papers suggesting that if you reduce any meals, that shortens your life. I mean, if you eliminate any meals, so I keep, usually in the weekends, I have the full 3 meals plus a snack. So you just gotta keep it in a way that you avoid entering any group that gets in trouble, but at the same time you take the benefit. To me, even if I eat lunch on the weekend, I'm not hungry on Monday, so I'm completely adapted to this 5-2 no lunch pattern.
So for people like me who are always moving, maybe part of their occupation, for me it's grandkids and a dog, I end up doing 6 miles of activity a day even when I'm on the FMD. And then I think, I can't sleep, I'm starving. And so I get up and eat the celery, cheat with the celery. I mean, can you have a little extra calories? What do you do for the people who just can't restrict their activity?
You don't have to restrict your activity. I mean, you cannot go run 10 miles, but there's no reason to restrict your activities. I think people have to be careful, because if what you say is hunger, that's okay. You know, eventually, like me, when I didn't eat lunch, I was very hungry. I was miserable, right? But this is just 2 months of my life. After that was it. Yes, if it's hunger, it's okay. You get used to it, and then the second time, third time, you're done.
Suck it up, Chris.
If it's weakness and if it's hypotension, hypoglycemia,
can't suck
that's
that
a
up.
different story, right? Then you have to be careful, then you have to stop and find another way to do it. So I would say you cannot get into danger zones, but if it's just hunger, it won't be that long after that. So second, third, fourth cycle, then you're okay.
So it's a good time to ask about who would you say should not be thinking about the FMD? Are there any absolute contraindications, or is it all relative?
Yeah, what about age?
We used to say 65, 70, but now we've done a trial on Alzheimer's patients, and they did pretty good. I would look at biological age, so it's somebody's 70, but actually biologically they're 82. You know.
Maybe not.
And they're losing muscle mass rapidly. Yeah, probably not such a great idea, unless there is a problem that they're trying to solve. So if they're diabetic, and I would say, yes, then do it, because, or there's high CRP, high cholesterol, so I think it's the doctor and the nutritionist that should look at the case and make a decision. Is there such a bigger problem that we're trying to deal with, like Alzheimer's, for which maybe it's worth taking a little bit of a risk and monitoring very closely, like phase angle or muscle mass and bone density and all of that. I mean, usually we've seen even bone density, we have not seen reduction. And in mice, we actually see an increase. We did a lifelong study in mice, and the bone density increased in those that were on the FMD compared to the controls, meaning there was less of a loss in the FMD than in the control diet.
But aren't the watchouts like the people that are on insulin or on GLP-1s, or people that are, are those the patients you got to be careful with in terms of them dropping too much? Or
I would say that those on GLP-1 are the ones that are taking more of a chance. I think that the quicker they get off these drugs, the better it is. But I understand that some people might have to start like that. So we had a doctor in Brazil that focuses on oncology patients, but because they're so hungry with the FMD, she gives them liraglutide. She gives them like a short-acting GLP-1 agonist. I thought it's a very clever use. Just removes the hunger for however many hours, and then the patients, they get used to it. So before the GLP-1 can do damage, I think she removes it.
I love it. Yeah, I'm all about trying to wean meds.
And by the way, this should have been the way these drugs are used, right?
Agree.
First, try the lifestyle, have the professionals, do it for a couple of years, and then only if all of it fails, you do this. Instead, it turned out to be, first you do the drugs, then you get the side effects, and then you're back, regain all the weight and all the problems, and then you look for something else.
Fasting for Ramadan used to be easy, but the last few years with work and a growing family, it's felt almost impossible, but not anymore. Thanks to Ozempic for Ramadan.
Running my halal card during Ramadan is really hard. Smelling all my delicious meats in their 48-hour marinades on my butter grill. With Ozempic for Ramadan, now I don't even get hangry when white women ask if I have salmon.
Even though over 70% will discontinue it within a couple of years.
Why do they do that? Is it side effects?
Actually, one paper shows 85%. Some others say 70%. I don't know if it's all reasons. It could be cost, it could be it's not getting reimbursed, it could be side effects.
What about all these rumors about GLP-1 face and GLP-1 lips?
Well, that's reality.
But a lot of times, it's the GI side effects are the big ones.
You have neon, so optic nerve damage and muscle loss. And some papers suggest, others don't, but some papers suggest increased depression, increased anxiety, increased suicide rate. Some of it is clear, some of it is unclear, but certainly the lack of joy in food, you start not enjoying food anymore.
That would be depressing. Because I got some dark chocolate that makes me very happy.
Yes, all of a sudden they take away your joy for eating. It's not exactly a good thing to do for the rest of your life, let's say.
The data that you showed on not anosmia, but hyposmia, like lower smell, that data that you showed today,
yeah.
What was that all about? That was so interesting.
So this is the people that were selected for being overweight and obese, or just a regular population in Italy. And actually, 30 to 40% of them had hyposmia, so reduced
sense of smell.
A sense of olfactory function. The 6 cycles of the FMD took it down to almost very, very low levels.
So was the thought that they were overeating because they couldn't really smell their food? I mean, I'm trying to, maybe that's not...
Well, that's a possibility that we discuss in the paper, which is that contributing then to your overeating pattern just because you cannot smell it, you cannot taste it, because the paper was about taste and smell. I just showed the olfactory, but it was also taste function, right? There was improved. But the olfactory function was improved a lot more because it was also a lot worse. The taste loss was not that prevalent, but the smell loss was surprisingly high.
I mean, I could argue that either way. Would it make you eat less or would it make you eat more? I don't, like if you don't enjoy your food because you can't smell it.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. There was just I would think we cited some papers that would talk about eating more because you can't
smell it. Can't smell that chocolate, Chris.
Yeah, but I can feel the chocolate. It's in my suitcase, so I know it's there.
He's been thinking about that chocolate.
It's called addiction.
It's like this interview is going way too long.
I know, totally. Sorry, we've taken up way too much of your time, but this has been so much fun.
It's funny, when I was changing the battery for one of the cameras, I saw the chocolate in there and I thought, should I pass that around the table a little bit? Or?
Now, think about this. If you could do the FMD, anybody can do it. Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
But that's a big if. If I could do the FMD, I thought I was going to die when I did the first FMD.
And that's good, right? That's good.
It is?
I think it's good. I think it's good in the sense.
You say that with a smile.
I wrote an article for an Italian newspaper, basically talking about the importance of having some effort, right? So we're sort of moving AI is going to do everything for us,
Oh my
right?
God.
And we're sort of not valuing anymore the benefit of doing something. For example, let's say that I come up with a pill that replaces the effects of running or exercise and health. Is that better?
No.
Is it better to take a pill instead of going running? Is it better to take a pill instead of going walking? I would say, most people would say, forget that, no way, you should walk. So I think fasting is just such a part of our history, where we came from, what we always did, and what every organism that ever lived did. Bacteria, yeast, worms, name it. I would argue that exposure once in a while, in a very mild form, like fasting mimicking diet, twice a year. I would say that even if there was a pill that could replace it, you wouldn't want to replace it. And this is what we hear from so many people. I feel empowered.
I hope it's chocolate, that pill tastes like. Sorry, no, to be serious. But, when we bought the first kit, my wife and my daughter and I did it together for 5 days. And we participated in the daily fireside, the Zoom for an hour. And the instructor was really good. But she kept saying every day, she'd say, you can do anything for 5 days. And I would say, oh, you're making a big assumption here when it comes to me. And my daughter and wife would look over and give me the glare, Dad, you're a wussy. What's wrong with you? You can do anything for 5 days.
Yeah, obviously, Absolutely, some people cannot. And so I think we have foundation clinics. In the foundation clinic, the job of the dietitians is to understand what they have in front of them. And some people, are willing to make all kinds of changes, and some people are not willing to make any changes. And so, you have to work with each person and figure out what can you get them to do.
Smart goals.
Absolutely. Some people, 5 days is a nightmare.
Yeah.
It's a lifetime.
Yeah.
Well, as long as I can get up in the middle of the night and I'm not sleeping anyway, I'm too hungry to sleep, and have some celery, and I'm good.
Now, keep in mind that I forgot what the percentage is, 10 in 100,000, they have gluconeogenesis defects.
Oh, you might be one of those, Chris.
If you have something like that,
you're screwed.
Then
there's
it's
a real.
dangerous.
So I need an excuse like that. How do I figure out if I have that early?
Well, you look at your ketone bodies, you look at your glycemia.
Glucose, CGM.
Glucose level, yeah. And if it just keeps going down and never comes back up, then.
Actually, you should have a CGM. So you didn't have a CGM while you did the Prolon?
Not when I did Prolon.
Shouldn't people have a CGM?
Probably be a good idea to see how it affects you, first time especially. Yeah, absolutely. To also pick problems like this, pick genetic predisposition.
I think my blood glucose, I would have guessed it at about 5 or 10. Something like
Hence the chocolate. It's all making sense.
Somebody give him some chocolate.
No, please. That's right. We're calling a code. CPR. No. We don't need airway breathing.
We have to take him to the medical center. Yeah.
That look on your face, Valter, was, he doesn't know these numbers at all. Who is this idiot?
Oh my God.
But you do need sugar right now.
That's true, you do.
Well, my chocolate is 100%. It's Montezuma is 100% dark chocolate. So.
I could get 85. 90 already, I'm starting to...
You're going to have to try...
No, I tried it 100%.
You did?
Yeah.
It was too
rough,
bitter?
Yeah.
Oh, so you're like, with 100% chocolate, you're like I am with FMDs.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't handle it. You can't handle 100%.
There is now additional benefits of the 100% compared to the 85.
Look, all you have to do is suffer for 2 months. Eating.
No, I tried it. I tried to suffer, but it didn't work. But there you go. See, different people, different...
There's got to be some genetic defect going on. I'm kidding. Oh my God. The chocolate.
My wife thinks 100% is disgusting. She doesn't know how I can eat it. But she can do 85.
I think it's just probably, if you do it enough time, you probably...
There you go, 2 months.
But
I'm hooked on 100%,
yeah.
but my grandkids
but again,
call
I'm
it
not
dirt.
motivated because I never seen a paper showing that 100% is any better than 85%. so
I've been meaning to write that paper, but...
Why would I go through that suffering,
That's funny. My grandkids accuse me of eating dirt.
Yeah, exactly, right. So why will I eat dirt for, months potentially?
They love chocolate, but then I bring out the Montezumas and they say, dirt. That's disgusting. Don't you have some...
I mean, it's named after Montezuma's Revenge. Like, that's a bad name.
Although I have to say, I used to eat the one that's 50%, and now I'm just disgusted by the 50%,
me too.
Right? So I think you could tell, like coffee, I used to put a lot of sugar, now...
Neuroadaptation, right?
Yeah, so eventually I think it's... Yeah, probably also the fact that the sugars hide a lot of the taste. And then eventually your brain can detect all these different flavors and then it just enjoys it so much, then the sugar is viewed as an interference, right? Because it just covers everything.
Did we ask him about protein powders?
No, not yet.
When is the Longo version brand of protein powders with emulsifiers and binding agents and sugars going to hit the market?
It's already hit the market.
What is it?
Yeah. Of course, keep in mind, I don't make a penny out of this. Everything goes to charity, but yeah, the L-protein is already out there, right? So it's a protein powder, vegan, that has a little bit of a supplementation with one amino acid. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. One amino acid.
And you designed it?
I designed it.
I didn't know that.
What's it called?
And it tastes very good, by the way.
What's it called?
L-protein, longevity protein.
Oh. Why does it taste good? I thought protein powders were supposed to be disgusting.
No, now the bar is coming out because a lot of people are asking, and it's all over plant-based and very healthy, low sugar.
But you're the low protein guy. Why would you design a protein powder?
For people that eat meat,
as a substitute?
Yeah. And also for people that are vegan. Is a supplement.
Because you're afraid they might be too low protein? Or?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of vegans are, 15-20% of vegans are below the minimum. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of people out there that because they're vegan, they say, well, I can't eat this anymore, what am I gonna eat? And yeah, so if you can get another 25 grams of good mix, or if you're a carnivore and you eat a lot of meat, you can say, okay, I'm gonna skip this meal and have that instead, right? Or instead of lunch, right? Like the way I do it, but now you can...
It's low methionine.
So you are a little bit like Simon. Simon recommends a little bit of protein every day.
Protein powder.
Protein powder.
No, I don't recommend protein powder to everybody. Just the people. I recommend it to people that, I think people should eat food. That's good. But to some people...
I see.
You can have intolerances, you can have... Some people, it's a nightmare, and that's a lot of people. It's millions and millions of people, if not tens of millions of people. And so I think that then you have to make it easy for them to say, okay, yeah, you can skip lunch, which will have been a fillet of fish or whatever, and then substitute it with this, because it has less amino acids of the animal kind. That's a good option to have. And a lot of people, it's not always easy to have lunch, so it's also good to say, okay, maybe today I'm just gonna take this. But what is this? And there's not a lot of food out there that you can think of as longevity promoting.
So what are my takeaways from this episode? I know many of you must be wondering how much trust to put in Valter when there are so many competing voices in our protein-obsessed nation. I have a few thoughts. Thought one is the sign of a solid scientist is they tend to gather evidence from all kinds of studies. When you hear somebody say they completely discount animal studies or epidemiology or some other type of study, run. I can't think of a scientist whose work has stood the test of time who didn't understand that every type of study has its weakness, but the best way to get closest to the truth is interpret them all together, as Valter does. Number two, when Valter says the word protein is meaningless, I think it's a lot like carbs or fat. There's a big difference between fiber, which is a carb, and sugar, and a big difference between omega-3 found in fish and trans fat. Number three, I am absolutely gobsmacked that studies that show the foods that are most likely to get us to old age without a chronic disease have meat at the bottom. I never would have thought they would fall below Coca-Cola and desserts, but that's what the best studies are showing. Number four, I have always wondered about things that make us feel good in the short term and may even reduce symptoms of disease, but are so bad in the long term. My mother had a master's in biochem from Cornell and was in cancer research, and yet she smoked heavily. She said it made her feel better, helped her to relax, to lose weight, to make her skin look better. And she was right for 20 or 30 years. Heavy sun exposure is like that if you tan. The carnivore diet is like that. And I have friends who just drink Diet Coke and not water because Diet Coke makes them feel so much better than water does. And I think that's why Valter's approach makes so much sense. He focuses on the things that'll make you look and feel better in 20 or 30 years, not next week or next year. 5, when the word protein is used, I think most Americans hear it as meat or eggs. From a scientific point of view, Valter is right, but from a cultural point of view, it implies foods that studies show age us more than any others. And finally, America's obsession towards protein is driving us towards more ultra-processed foods. For example, this David bar, which claims to be higher in protein than any other protein bar and has the worst combination of amino acids, is designed by Andrew Huberman and Peter Attia, who are widely considered to be grifters among the scientific community. You made it this far into the episode? Thank you so much. I always forget to ask you to subscribe, but if you do, it helps us to get great guests like Tamiko and Valter.